Hello, welcome to this installation of the Lexbe e-discovery webinar series, a litigator's guide to going native, pros, cons, and tips for native review and native productions. My name is Christian and I'll be introducing our speaker today, Gene Albert. A little bit about the e-discovery webinar series by Lexbe. The webinars typically take place monthly and cover a variety of relevant e-discovery topics. And if you have technical questions or issues about the webinar, you can email webinars@lexbe.com. A little bit about our speaker before I turn it over to him. Gene Albert is the CEO of Lexbe. Lexbe is a provider of cloud-based litigation, processing, review, and document management software and several e-discovery services. Gene is a frequent speaker and author on e-discovery and legal technology issues. He's a member of the Planning Committee, the Electronic Discovery Institute State Bar of Texas, an e-discovery consultant and expert, and has an MBA and a JD. And with that, I will turn it over to Gene for today's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Christian. And welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending today. I'm excited about doing this one on native review and productions. This native document reviews have been an area where there's a lot of confusion and different opinions about things, and hopefully we'll kind of clear the air and make this easier for you to take advantage of this and understand what the benefits and what issues are to address going forward with native reviews and native documents in general. The agenda of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the controversy concerning native review and productions. There are different opinions people have about it. Go over the statutory basis in the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure and the case law. Talk about metadata, privilege review, redaction issues that could come up in natives. Compare native with other production format options and go over the advantages and disadvantages of each. Talk about ESI agreements and orders and how those can play an important role. Got to go back on the controversy issues and then show how we've chosen to address these issues in our productions, and ended up with some practical takeaways and practice tips. As always, we'd love to get your comments on things. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to contact me or Christian, and we'll have our contact information at the end. First off, what are native files? Well, these are the electronic documents and the associated file structures that were created by an application. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Mac Office files, these are all native files. And also native files will be the emails in different formats, Microsoft PowerPoints and MSGs and Mac Mail. Also things like Access databases, QuickBooks databases, that sort of thing. Viewing and searching documents in native format may require the original application, and that's part of the reason for processing is to make them more searchable and more usable. This is compared with the common, still common paginated TIFF format or image documents that are used in productions by a lot of litigation support systems, and also the more modern PDF format that's used in e-discovery a lot. So we'll talk about the different aspects of how these interrelate. What's the controversy? Well, and this is my personal opinion on this, just with practice talking to people over the years on things, and this is certainly an area that opinions will differ. But I'm trying to kind of give the position on both sides of this and what they're concerned about. The people that want native documents and native production sometimes are concerned about a number of things with the traditional TIFF-based, primarily the TIFF-based productions. One is that the TIFF files lose data. They don't have all the data that are in the native file, and this is certainly true. The paginated productions, TIFF and PDF, by their nature, create a virtual printing of the document, the same as, and that's what allows it to be date stamped at the print level and allows it to be looked at outside of the original application. And by its nature, information can be lost in that version of the document. TIFF in particular loses color. It's an older format that's the same one that's used for faxing and it was designed to not be color. And the ones that's primarily used in e-discovery do not have color, which obviously creates a lot of problem for a lot of documents that will be converted. There is ways of getting color versions of some documents that they'll be brought in as JPG files, but or PNG files, but that can be kind of manual and is often not done or done very well. Another is the TIFF productions will be much larger than native documents, and I've got a little bit more on that later, but they can be 5 to 10 times larger or more, and that can make a difference when you're in a hosted review environment, just kind of moving data around and how quickly search comes back, etc. There's more metadata if you're in a native file. So there's lots of metadata that is associated with native files, and much of that is extracted in a traditional TIFF or PDF production, but there's always more metadata in the natives. And then some claim that deduplication is easier in native. Personal opinion is that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, that you can dedupe in with natives or with non-natives if it's been properly processed. But some people say that. What are the arguments against native production? And it's opposed by many, and many firms will fight it. Sometimes in any native whatsoever, or sometimes as a more general concern. One of the principal reasons people don't like it is there's not Bates level, page level Bates stamping. Who would have thought when Mr. Bates invented the Bates stamp that it would still be, he did that at the early 20th century, I think, that we'd still be using them and that it would be so important. But attorneys do very much want page level Bates stamping in my experience, and anything that tries to move away from that, people have difficulties with that for depositions. Not that it couldn't be done in theory, but in practice they like seeing that. There's a concern that evidence can be altered in native files. They can be opened and edited, and that's certainly true, but there's a number of ways of protecting against that as well that I'll talk about a little bit later. There's a concern that natives require a broader review, that you have to do a closer privilege review, and there's more data to look at. That's certainly the case. That's the other side of the coin, that there's more data in the natives, so that's part of the reason people want to look at them. There's a concern that the natives by themselves are not being OCR. There's not any optical character recognition of native files if you don't do further processing on them, and that's certainly a valid concern. I would share that. The natives cannot be directly redacted. Redaction by its nature changes the natives, so that's a concern of just doing solely a native review that needs to be addressed in some fashion. It's also said that that a native review is cheaper, and some stuff can be cheaper. That's much of the processing cost that used to be associated with taking documents into PDF or TIFF was very high. That's dropped down with, I think in general, and we know with us in particular. So I would not agree that that's a very big factor in things compared to the other costs that are involved just in e-discovery, much less the attorney time and stuff. But those are the arguments we hear back and forth on this. So we'll get into these in some more detail, and then towards the end circle back on how we've addressed these different points in our productions. First off, what's required? The primary point of form of production is in Federal Civil Procedure 34B, and their state laws tend to be close to this. The logic of the rule is that when one makes a request for production, that in general that electronically stored information, ESI, should be provided in a form which it is ordinarily maintained, or a form that is reasonably usable. And if there's no agreement, this is how the documents are to be produced. While there's still some controversy about that, I think most courts have determined that was very much meant to mean native files. So at least some form of native files is a form that is ordinarily maintained. There has been litigation of reasonably usable, if what that means, PDFs or TIFFs. But pretty clear that that includes native, if there's no agreement. Then if the requesting party in a request for production requests a different format and the receiving party does not object, then the receiving party is bound by the requested form of production. So if somebody asks for something and the other party doesn't read it or understand it, you're going to be bound by that. If the requesting party specifies a different form of the native, the producing party can object and propose its own form of production. So what this means is that if somebody wants to have a TIFF production, you receive either grant or receive a TIFF production that needs to be proposed, and if the other party doesn't object to that, then they'll be bound by it, and that's and that if there's no agreement, it goes back to native. And then often in larger cases, these issues are dealt with in the scheduling order or a specific ESI order agreement, and that's a better way of handling that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. Here's just recent case law that has to do with native productions. I won't jump into this in detail here, and you can read through that if you're interested. What typically comes up on this is this is usually involved where one party or the other didn't like the way the original request for production went out. So somebody requested one format, they decided later they didn't want it, but they didn't object at the time of that. There can also be issues where they accepted in one format, and later on they wanted to have it a second time in a different format. So much of the issue that comes up in the case law here, and we see in general in our practice, is that if people are really looking closely at the request for productions and the responses and thinking about this issue in conjunction with that, you shouldn't be too surprised, and should know what you need in the case. Even better if, as a matter of course, one is including applicable provisions on how one wants the request for production, including native files, in ESI order or scheduling order. These issues are can be taken care of in due course. One issue comes up is metadata. One of the issues that people talk about when they talk about wanting native versions of files is to make sure that they have the metadata or all the metadata. And that can mean different things. Experts in the area define it differently. It probably certainly means, and most importantly, email fields such as a sender, receiver, date, time, number of attachments. That information is in an email and is brought out as database type data and is fielded into load files and such. We'll talk about. That's metadata, and that's just critically important in modern litigation. So that's considered to be metadata. There's also application file field data in documents like Word and Excel, and this can include the author, the date created, date last modified, time spent editing the file. This can be valuable information too, to be, but it's often stripped out as a matter of course in modern corporate systems. So sometimes you won't see a lot of it with some collections. There's operating system file metadata like date created and date last modified that comes off the file system before it's copied out. This can be helpful. Sometimes it is usually not retained fully unless a forensic copy is done, which can be more expensive. So oftentimes this isn't needed, but that can be available. Then there can be change information such as edits and track changes and revisions. This can be critically important information, and this will be in Word and Excel and PowerPoints and similar type documents. And this is the type of information that will not be fully retained if a document has been converted to TIFF or PDF in a paginated format, but is really critically important. And This is sometimes referred to as metadata, and this is often the most important metadata for some information that one needs to get for natives. This is a listing of the metadata requirements in load files done by the Department of Justice of what they want, and you can see there's I don't know, there's 50 fields here, probably close to it. So this is the type of metadata that is commonly pulled out in our systems and others, and then can be fielded into load files. So this metadata, most of this data came out of the files themselves and would have been available as a native file, but it's brought out in processing as well and fielded for litigation databases. So it is available in the this type of information is available in the native file, but it's certainly available. It's pulled out in load files, and typically the way it's dealt with certain systems. So sometimes I'll hear people argue that they need to have native files, which we don't oppose. We're proponents of native files being made available when the parties want it, but they'll say that they want natives because they don't have enough metadata, and my question is, well, what metadata exactly were you not getting, because this is the type of information that's pulled out. But and if we're referring to this fielded type metadata, then typically this is brought out as part of processing. If by metadata somebody means track changes or revisions, that sort of thing, that critically is you do need to be looking at natives for that. One issue on doing native review is whether when someone's talking about doing native reviews, they're talking about only looking at the native files, or if they're talking about having native files as a supplement to a PDF or a paginated view, and having them link in. It can be done both ways. In our system, we do the linking, which will show a little bit of that later, where we have both. Sometimes when people are talking about native reviews, they're talking about only reviewing in the natives. That can raise some issues, particularly with larger litigations of just ones of efficiency, that if somebody really wants to do it that way. It is done with smaller cases, and if somebody is dealing with PSTs of a gig, that can be a few thousand emails or something, one can go into Outlook and work with the files, and we see people do that. If you get into larger cases, it just breaks down. It's just so slow and inefficient. It's very difficult. There's other issues with that. Just trying to do a review in Outlook, if you were to try to do that in a very large case, some of the attachments you might not be able to open if you didn't have the software for it. You can't share with other people. It's a one-at-a-time thing. You can't dedupe email within Outlook. There's not keyword highlighting and searching. You don't. There isn't OCR isn't done on any attachments that need OCR. It can be very slow, particularly in large PSTs to work with it. So for those reasons, that tends to break down if you're working with a very large case. Another issue to where when one's working with emails, it's important, it's usually helpful and can be just required on larger cases to have some amount of processing done and not deal with just the natives, is the amount of nesting that we see in emails. So this is an example of nesting that goes down 4 levels, with the top level there being the initial email, and then there's an email as an attachment to the first email, which we see a lot. And then that one has several attachments, a number of attachments, and then included in there is a RAR file, which has other attachments within, or it has component files within that. This is the sort of, then this one goes down 4 levels. This is not at all unusual, to have things go down to this level. We see it all the time. I think the greatest nesting we've seen in an active case, a live case, was 8 levels deep. And it's like the Russian nesting dolls. You have to keep pulling them out and trying to work with this sort of thing without having the various component parts extracted and then dealt with separately, metadata pulled out for each of these individual files and put into a database, and then have the families rolled back up, would be very, very difficult to work with. So that's the main reason that processing often is very helpful or required for dealing with native files. So you don't just do native. I wanted to mention too that Excel files are a huge factor in this as well. In that native files, trying to work with Excel files in a paginated environment is really a non-starter usually, because they just don't come across very well, other than the most simple one. So those are typically the ones that people want at minimum, and then oftentimes other native files are requested or required as well as part of the negotiation. But we see at minimum the Excels, and often more or all. I referred to the issue of imaging files, particularly to TIFF, and how that can make the size of the productions and the review, if you do that before the review, gets so large. And these are some examples of what we see. So if when documents come in native format, we see about 50,000 pages per gigabyte. We create in our environment, we create a text-based PDF that for viewing and bait stamping, pagination, and that typically about doubles the size. So you get about 50,000 pages for that. So once one goes to an image format, including the tiffing, they get much larger, and they're less dense. So we typically see about 10,000 pages or less per TIFF file, so that's about 5 times larger. It varies by file type, and the bottom one is an actual Excel spreadsheet that and the Excels are very efficient. That the TIFF version of that ended up being 200 times larger than the original native file, and it wasn't like this TIFF file was even usable. It ends up being spaghetti on the large ones like that. So the TIFFing of the Excels in particular, it ends up not being very usable. Next, I'm going to run through just the different forms of production and go over again the pluses and minuses of doing them in different ways. The first one is to do a pure native one. The advantages are that this is the most accurate approximation of what the custodian saw and used, the custodian being the person involved in the litigation who was working with the data. You've got minimal file expansion. When you pull PSTs out, there could be a little. All the metadata that would be available in the application is available. Disadvantages is that you need to have reviewing applications for all the file types. It can increase attorney review time if there aren't paginated equivalents and you don't get the bait stamping. Some processing, as I mentioned, is usually needed to sort of pull out the attachments, or it can be very difficult. Harder to do a privilege review, particularly within the attachments and such with that. It's not going to be fully searchable on that. For Excel files and PowerPoints and some other ones, this may be the only way that one really can effectively review a file. For other ones, it may help or not. The next, I wanted to mention a concept of near natives. One ambiguity with what a native file is for some it's fairly clear, like a Word or Excel file, but other things it's not so clear. Databases and such really aren't very usable without some sort of intermediate conversion, other specialty applications. So databases, often reports that are needed will be run and converted into Excel or into some other format to be worked with. So when one should be careful agreeing to all natives, because you may be, without some specificity of what you mean by native, you may be agreeing to give up databases or some other things of more data than was intended or required. Next is PDF. This would be converting into PDF. The advantage would be that they'd be they're paginated, easy to use. We use PDFs all the time for almost everything. Does not require a review platform, and you can do page level page stamping. and there's going to be less expansion size, much less than the TIFFs if it's done as a text-based PDF. This is while this is used some, and they can be used with load files, just the industry continues to use the TIFFs for a lot for that. But the text-based PDFs are a good alternative for that, and particularly where size and cost is an issue. And we use those as our base reviewing document in Lexbe, along with the natives to allow one to see a paginated color version of the documents. Lastly, with the TIFF images as a type, and this predates the PDFs. They're much they don't have the color. They're much larger, but they're still the baseline format used in many type applications. And in Lexbe we import those, and we see a lot of TIFF productions come in all the time, and those can be brought in. They can also be associated with the natives as well if that was included in the load files. Wanted to mention the what we call blended production here at Lexbe, and this is what we do to bring together these different types of formats and different needs. Is we do a production that includes the process natives, a PDF viewing version, and extracted text, so that people can get different versions that they may need for the other platforms, and then natives can be included or not as wanted with that, and then it allows a way for us to provide this for different formats without getting into format disputes. I want to talk a little bit about the load files. Load files, when people talk about a native production, often there is not a load file, but there can be load files with native files, and they're needed with TIFF and TIFF-based productions, and they can be helpful with other types. And these are fielded data that came out of the metadata, and with the TIFF files it actually does the page associations to bring back document breaks. And there's a number of industry standards that are used for this to pull this information in, and this is where a lot of the metadata is actually used when it's been extracted. There's different types. At Lexbe we use Lexbe load file, and we use Excel as the base method for the load file, and then you can see the sort of information that goes in there. It'll have the Bates number, where attachment numbers, where they start and end by Bates, so you can see the email family associations. It'll have email metadata such as sent, received, attachments, that sort of thing. And this will be for all the documents in there, and this goes into the litigation database and is associated with the documents. Another common one in the industry you might have heard of is called a DAT file, originally developed by Concordance. It's that same information, but it uses different delimiters. It's harder to read, but if properly done and not corrupt, it allows people using those ones that come in on that, and Lexbe can import these as well to come in and take the metadata and field it in and associate it with the documents. Another major one is DII, which is originally developed by Summation, and it's a little bit different format, but the same information. So that's load files. I wanted to mention the importance of the ESI agreements and orders. Much of the confusion that we see, as I mentioned, coming up with native files and productions in general, can be handled with walking through the issues that are in a good ESI order agreement. These can be done as separate agreements by the parties. They're often done as an order. It could be called an ESI protocol. It can be rolled into the scheduling order. A number of different ways to do that, and they can cover a number of different items that have to do with discovery. And they often include issues of production format, including native file formats. And then having this as a checklist and items to go through when you're doing your productions and looking at your cases can be very helpful. At Lexbe, we've developed a sample one that we make available on request, and we'd be happy to send you a copy if you're interested. It's been very popular, but we have a number of alternate provisions in there. So I pulled out the ones of just how native files, and this is a couple different versions of how one might do native files. You could have one having no native files. There's a version that would be only spreadsheets and presentations or all native files, and it would be specific about redaction and privilege files to make sure that's all clear on what's being handled with those, and that you're not doing native deliveries of privileged or redacted files. So let us know if you'd like to have a copy of that, and we will be happy to send it to you. I wanted to roll back through the arguments for and against native production that was earlier on, and then just mention how we deal with this as we work through these issues ourselves. The first concern on the native production was that that TIFFing can lose data. We agree with that, and for that we index in our review platform both the native versions and OCR versions of documents. And as I mentioned a little bit later in this presentation, this gives the best version of pulling out all the searchable data one can get, and that if you were simply to do a TIFF version, or you definitely would not get everything that would be available that would be searchable on documents, and a lot of things can be lost. So we agree 100% with that, and we handle that with a multi-index. TIFF images lose color. That's absolutely true. We handle that in ours. While we can produce TIFFs by spec for productions, when we review within our platform, we have tabs that show both the native and also the color version of the PDF, so you can see color comes through on the PDF much better. The TIFF images explode production sizes. We agree with that. Our base processing doesn't make TIFFs. It's not relying on TIFFs. You can make a TIFF for production if needed, but you can review and make productions in the native and PDF out of our system. More metadata is available. We agree. So in our system and with the productions, we pull in the metadata from both the native and the paginated version in PDF, and the native file is included in the database. You can pull more metadata out of the native as needed. We also show track changes, etc. In our PDF paginated versions. Easier to dedupe. I think a dedupe can be done in both environments. And in our system, we've got two types of dedupe. We've got an exact dedupe and then a near dedupe, which are both really powerful technologies. The arguments against native production, page level base stamping, you lose that. We agree clients find that to be very important. We handle that by having the native, but also a PDF, viewable PDF, and that allows you to do bait stamping, also control numbers on the document. Native evidence could be altered. We control this with having MD5 hashes, which is authentication and a digital signature on all imported files, so you can check if a file's ever been altered. They require broader reviews. We agree that there's more data in there, and use our multi-index feature of being able to pull all the data out. They're concerned that natives are not OCR'd. Agree again, and we do that by OCRing the PDFs and then joining that with the index, so you get a better one. I think that's a valid point, and we handle that in our platform. Natives can't be redacted. We handle that with having an inline redaction feature that allows one to redact on the PDF, and then when you do a production, the native is suppressed and the redacted PDF is produced instead. And worry of increased costs. The way we do pricing, we don't charge for the PDF, so we do a paginated version at no cost in our system. So I think, as I mentioned, the processing costs have really brought that down a lot. Let me just show a couple things of how we do things in our platform. Here you can see the document viewer, and we have tabs. So we've got a tab for the PDF that's highlighted there, but there's also a tab for the original, which shows the native, an HTML view, the text, redacted, annotated. We also have a translated tab that would go in there that also goes into the index. So we do this by being able to jump back and forth between different tabs. The multi-index, I've talked about this before, but there's certain text that will come out of an OCR version of the image. Certain text will come out of the native, and they're not entirely the same. So the only way to get all of that is to join them together. And working with versions of documents in text, not just in native. There's a number of things one can do with things, such as more advanced search capacities like concept search, and also with text highlighting and such that tends to be easier in a review environment. Native files, as I mentioned, they're usually much better if they're expanded out and the attachments are taken out and then associated with the file, so you're not just looking at an MSG. And this slide here shows that when you're working in those environments that you can code the entire email family at once. Here you can see all the attachments of the email family and jump back and forth between them. You can work with exact dupes and near dupes and jump back and forth. So by getting down to the document level, by pulling the attachments apart, then you're able to work with them on a more granular and helpful basis. Similar to that, the metadata that comes out can be used for automatic privilege logging and other purposes in the system. The near dupe grouping, I'll just give a little plug for that. I think that's a great technology that allows you to find documents that aren't exactly the same but very close to each other, more than 50% the same, and very powerful for giving faster and more accurate reviews. You can look at groups of documents that are very close to each other and make a responsiveness or privilege determination by a group of documents. You can also find ones that might have been missed with other review methodologies to make sure privileged documents don't make it out the door. And we're big advocates of that technology. And just you can see a slide of how that works, where you can see the other near dupes in the document set. I wanted to end up with some practice tips. The production format issues in native and others are best handled in a properly drafted ESI order. You should consider what review technology system you and your opposition are going to be using and understand that early on. That's really drives these issues of production format. The Federal Rules of Civil Procedures should be looked at and followed closely because they're binding, and people sometimes don't pay enough attention to them and get themselves into trouble later. The Rule 26 conferences also are very helpful on getting these issues out with a technical expert to make sure that the attorneys understand exactly what's important from the technical side, and they can integrate that into their case. Databases and other file types can't be produced natively and should be handled, or often shouldn't be, or often have to be handled another way. When you're requesting natives, you want to make sure you do that specifically in your request for production. If you want specific metadata, often having it extracted and put into a load file is really the best way to get to it. It's not that helpful having it just in the natives. So if you want to make sure you're getting metadata, which you should, you probably natives, you may want both the native and the extracted metadata. Determine what type of file types you need in native. You really don't want all of them, and it just depends on the case. And then think how you're going to be dealing with OCR and other issues to be able to get full searchability. When you're producing natives, you want to make sure that your review platform can deal with them and handles the OCR. You'll want to QC how redaction is being done and your work product. You may want to consider the near dupe technology for additional privilege protection. And clawback agreements, which we didn't talk about here, always a good idea on that. Wanted to just say one more thing before I turn that back over to Christian. We're preparing some check sheets on things to consider when doing requesting and receiving native productions and doing native reviews. And if you like that as well, please let us know. We'd be happy to send you a copy. And I'm sure we ran over on this one a little bit. I apologize for that for anybody that had to with that, but we'll have an on-demand version of that as well. And with that, I'll turn that back to Christian. Thanks.
Thank you, Gene. Great presentation, and thank you again, everybody, for attending and watching today's webinar. As you can see, we'll be making the recorded streaming version, MP3 podcast version, and PDF of the slide deck available to everyone that registered or attended today's webinar. And if you'd like that, I can email it to you, and you see my email there on the screen. And we'll also get those up on the website. Here's a little bit about what people are saying about the webinars, and we'd appreciate your feedback too if you want to chime in about today's webinar or if you want to just contact us to talk about it. And again, you saw our contact information there on the screen. And if you'd like to learn more about Lexbe, please contact myself. We'd be happy to set something up for you so you can see it. And here's a little bit about what some reviewers are saying about the Lexbe platform. So thank you again, everybody, for attending, and have a great day.